The first is, this applies back to the things they said that you can do. Understand the definitions involved in privacy. So we have a list on our site and community.datacookie.com of some of the definitions. There's other documents out there online that you can find. But you should create your own document for what it means to be, a data subject under GDPR, or what it means to be lawful basis, or a processor, and so on and so forth, just to make sure that you've got that well defined within your own organization. The second thing is that you need to figure out and identify and define the GDPR applicable individuals, right? So we just talked about that definition, but just make sure you understand what you want to do with it. Again, my take is might as well make everyone GDPR applicable. But because if you're going to have to build it for one, you have to build it for all, and it's probably a good thing to do anyway. The next, I think, if I could have just eliminated the whole rest of the presentation and said nothing else, that I think that a common thing that you need to do, not only for GDPR, but for all sorts of other governance initiatives, is to get an inventory of your data system, right? So understand where is your data, who owns it and manages it, of these external systems that you source data from, do they have consent, what's their process, what are they sourcing from, the external systems that you share data with, do they have privacy controls and lawful basis to process data? But you need to get an inventory of them to understand what they are, and then to be able to figure out how much information you can get about what they're doing with your data, or even internally within your organization. Then you also, once you do that, you can drill down and inventory the data models and all the systems and understand all the data that they have, right? That's maybe slightly less pragmatic, but it's important to do. And then once you've done that, all the data, where all the data are, then you can identify which GDPR applicable data is there, personal data and sensitive personal data that are in those systems. And one of the reasons that that's interesting, I had someone say the other day when I was talking about GDPR and a different topic, they said, isn't everything personal data? Why do you even need to identify what's personal? Because you have to treat it all that way if you move it. And in some cases that's true, but when you start thinking about things like rights of erasure and retention, I don't know the clear law on this, but I believe that in this case you can likely erase the personal data and the sensitive personal data of the information and not have to delete all the other details, right? As long as they're no longer identifiable, right? And there's so understanding which data it is that you delete is important, right? And are you anonymized, right? So it's essentially an anonymization task, and so that's an open question. Like, is erasure and anonymization the same thing, or is it truly erasure, right? I don't have the answer. I'll go back to I'm not a lawyer, but it's a topic to be discussed. I would hope that is what you have. The next practical step is to track the data movements and data lineage. So you want to start at the high level, system to system. Oh, we get information out of our CRM and it goes into our SIS, or we get information out of the ACT file that goes to our CRM, then goes to our SIS, and then goes here, and you just understand that at a high level. And then once you have that, then you can sort of try to figure out whether or not those systems are sort of have lawful basis or are appropriate. Then you can then move down to say, all right, let's look at the actual specific data that they have and what data is moving, right? And then lastly, you can start to add some sort of process or you can look at whether or not a data sharing agreement is necessary. So if you are sharing data, one of our clients did a presentation at our users group a couple months ago, talking about data sharing agreements within their organization, right, and externally. You can decide if you want to do it internally, but you do want to think about, if I'm sharing this data with someone, if I'm giving this list of student data to someone who is doing some sort of mailing or something, do I need to have some specific agreement that says what are they going to do with it, and when are they going to forget about it, or how are they going to delete it, what's the use of it? That probably would be helpful. I think it's unreasonable and not pragmatic to say that you can do that every single time. So I think internally to your organization, you want to have some global policies around data sharing and what people can and can't do. That doesn't require individual data sharing agreements for everything, but you definitely want to have that when you're sharing data with an external organization, right? It doesn't have to be your own document. It could be sort of a guiding principle or an MOU or something, but you definitely want to know that if I'm giving data to this company that's going to do this, they're not going to turn around and sell that data or market to those people or do something else without you knowing about it. hopefully you can see their privacy policy online. The next thing is to create a review process for data requests that include private data. So this is getting a little bit more complicated, but if you're already looking at data governance, or you've already got some sort of ticketing system for data requests on your campus, or data extracts, or anything that has to do with data builds, a lot of people have a data request or are looking to build it. If you're doing it, it's a good idea to think about adding an additional step or an additional question where you're able to flag things that include privacy, private data or GDPR applicable data, or individuals. So you're not going to be able to do this without having also done this inventory, or at least do it effectively, right? So if you know what the data is in the systems and which systems are private or which data within the systems are private, and then you have requests coming in for that data, then you can say, all right, we're going to need to do a review. And that review, maybe we need a data sharing agreement, or we just need to make sure that we're not doing anything silly. So it's an important thing. So you have to have some sort of data request process that's as centralized as possible. Be able to identify the systems that contain private data, and then add some sort of review step, governance step when that happens. The last is the data sharing agreements. I talked about that. You want to have something for managing internal data sharing and validating external data sharing, and then again, beware of the vendors that want to profit from the data. I think the vast majority of ed tech vendors who we work with, the vast majority of administrative vendors that you know of are not going to do anything, but there are people who get stars in their eyes around, I've got this data and there's value in it, right? So you just want to make sure that there's that you have some sort of agreement or contractual thing that they're not gonna share your data without consent. Also, make sure that your sourcing systems have a process for consent. How are you getting the data for your marketing lists, for your or for your advancement giving marketing to, and also then can people opt out? Do you need to sort of look at the things you have and retroactively ask for consent? I think maybe not, but we have to see. So that's an important thing to think about. Next is the changing the terms of service. I already mentioned that, like the privacy policy. You want to go ahead and publish that. You don't have to knock yourself over, but you probably have a lawyer do it. However, it's supposed to be readable. So I'm not a lawyer, so I guess it's maybe not fair to make fun of them. But lawyers don't always write readable terms of service and privacy policies. So you might want to have the lawyer write it up and then have a student write up a version or something. Again, review the policies of your external vendors. And then next is to create a process for data subject requests. So this is the thing we were talking about for rights of access requests or right of erasure requests, and as well as opt-outs and consent changes, right? So I would recommend using something similar to your current data request process. I don't really, this whole thing scares me a little bit in the sense that how do you validate that the person asking for their rights to access is the same person without having personal information? So I'm not really sure how that's going to play out, but I think having a human take it and look at it is going to be an important step until something more advanced gets figured out. But you need some sort of way for people to submit that. It needs to be done electronically. So let's talk about that. So the data subject access requests process is that in most circumstances it should be provided free of charge. There's some exceptions where you can charge some administrative fee if it has undue burden. It needs to be provided without delay and within a month. There's some exceptions that can be extended up to 3 months. The data subjects must be able to make requests electronically as well as physically, and then the following information must be available: the purpose of processing, why you have the data, the categories of their personal data that you have, who are the recipients or categories of recipients whom the personal data has been or will be disclosed, where possible, where possible, the envisaged period for which the personal data will be stored, if not possible, the criteria for which, okay, so how long you're going to keep it, and then what's the criteria for getting rid of it. You need to tell them if they have the right to request that data or right to erase it, or if they can restrict processing of it or object to the processing. So some things they don't have the right to do that, and that's maybe a little bit complicated to figure out, but you need to also tell them that. You have to give them the right to lodge a complaint with the supervising authority, which might be your, your data protection officers are rolled. And then where you haven't collected the data directly from that subject, you need to give them any available information as to where that source came from. And then if there has been any automated decision-making, including profiling. So that's what it's defined. This is, in my opinion, the most, onerous thing in the list. I understand the intent and the meaning by it, and I can see how people might be able to exploit it, like Freedoms of Information Act, things where people do that all the time. But I think having some process with which you can intake these requests would probably cover you as much as possible. So even that little form. And I did this just the other day on our site. If I go to our data quick, we have our privacy and security policy here, and I made a little link here, make a right of access request, and it sort of lists the things that you can do, and a person can come in and submit that request. And actually that can then get submitted to the cookbook and start a data request process, which we can talk about.